Thank you all for joining today's webinar entitled Fair Housing Rights and Alien Land Laws, Challenges and Advocacy for the Asian American Community. My name is Cindy Tsai. I am the interim president for Committee of 100 and have the distinct honor of welcoming our participants and our audience today. For those of you who are attending Committee of 100 event for the first time, welcome. And for those of you who are coming back from a previous discussion, welcome back. Committee of 100 is a nonprofit organization of Chinese Americans founded 35 years ago. Our dual mission then is the same as it is today: to promote the full participation of Chinese Americans in all aspects of American life and to advance constructive relations between the United States and Greater China. In today's environment, our dual missions is more important than ever before. We're thrilled to be partnering with APA Justice today to co-present the second of a series of talks about the recent resurgence of alien land laws. APA Justice and Committee of 100 are committed to continuing to shine a light on this important issue. Today's discussion will focus on three things: the lasting impact of housing discrimination on Asian Americans today, how purchasers, banks, mortgage companies, and real estate agents can push back and drive change, and actionable strategies to protect home ownership rights and advocate for fair policies. States like Texas, Florida, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Illinois are aggressively pushing discriminatory land ownership laws. To time with today's events, Committee of 100 issued an update on a quarterly report that we track on all the alien land laws that are proposed across the United States. There are two alarming data points that I'd like to share with you today. First, as of today, 28 states are currently considering 82 bills that would restrict property ownership in some way. And second, there are 22 states that have passed 38 bills that places restrictions on entities from certain countries from property ownership, 17 of which have already been passed into law in 2024. A link of the research and the interactive map can be found in the chat box, as well as the QR code on the screen. Additionally, APA Justice has a dedicated webpage and resource that details the history of alien land laws and is a great reference tool. The link will be dropped in the chat box, as well as the QR code on screen. I want to thank APA Justice co-founders Dr. Jeremy Wu, Stephen Pei, and Vincent Wang for their collaboration on the past two alien land laws events and the planning of future events. A few housekeeping matters. At the end of today's session, we ask that you complete a very short survey. This will help us plan future events. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, please type it in the question and answer box. Questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. And finally, this webinar is recorded and will be published on the Committee of 100 YouTube channel in the coming week. And now I have the honor to introduce all of our speakers today. Hope Atuel is the Executive Director of the Asian Real Estate Association of America, abbreviated AREAA. Scott Chang is a Senior Counsel for the National Fair Housing Alliance. John Trasviña is the former HUD Assistant Secretary of the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity under the Obama administration. And finally, Dr. Jeremy Wu, founder and co-organizer of APA Justice. Hope, Scott, and John will lead the discussion, and Jeremy will provide some closing remarks. And with that, I turn it over to John.
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We are now well over 100 participants around the country. It's a critically important discussion today. It's a special pleasure to be here to moderate today's program, hosted by the Committee of 100 and President Cindy Tsai, along with APA Justice and my friend Jeremy Wu. These are two outstanding organizations that have served the Asian American community for many years, who are now teaming up to protect the rights not only of Chinese Americans, not just Asian Americans, but of all Americans from arbitrary deprivation of property and constitutional rights. Scott Chang represents the National Fair Housing Alliance. While it is a coalition of local housing rights organizations found throughout the country, it is also the most respected voice in Washington, D.C. when it comes to fair housing. When I was President Obama's Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity at HUD, we greatly relied upon NFHA's expertise on law and policy matters, as well as the trust it engendered in diverse communities everywhere. Tremendous allies in the fight for justice embodied in the Fair Housing Act. This past week, the Trump administration cut off funding for NFHA and other organizations that Democratic and Republican administrations historically and consistently provided so the general public and real estate professionals could better understand their rights and responsibilities under the fair housing laws. The Trump administration action is a win only for discrimination. Finally, I want to add my thanks to Hope Atuel, who has helped AREAA national presidents and local affiliates to be the Asian American voice within the real estate industry and help local real estate professionals fulfill their roles with ethics, principles, and professionalism. The state and now possibly federal laws prohibiting or restricting the rights of non-citizens to buy property take us back to an era a century ago when Asian immigrants were denied the right to buy homes and farmland. Some were wrongly suspected to be security threats because of their ancestry or outright racism. Others were discriminated against for economic reasons. Today's proposed laws are poorly written and sweep up individuals and families way beyond their intended targets. Worse, they embolden those in our society who think that all Asian Americans are foreigners or are carrying out the agenda of their ancestors' homelands. Real estate professionals, organizations, and community members from within and beyond the Asian American and other targeted communities are fighting back calmly but forcefully and have amassed some victories in legislatures and in the courts. But new developments and challenges emerge daily. So we want to get right to the subject with our expert speakers and invite you to submit your questions in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can following the discussion. We will hear first from Scott Chang, who will set the stage with some key context on the Fair Housing Act, history of housing discrimination, and what we can do about it. Scott?
Thanks so much, Sean. Thanks for that kind introduction. We really miss having you at HUD. For much of America's history, communities of color were systematically excluded from economic opportunities through explicit policy decisions. In fact, many of our laws, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Japanese Internment Act, racially restrictive covenants, and many more, were explicitly and purposely designed to provide opportunities to whites and to simultaneously deny opportunities to people of color. White property owners and subdivision developers included provisions in property deeds forbidding the resale and sometimes the rental of such properties to non-whites. Racially restrictive covenants were endorsed by the federal government and the real estate industry at least through the 1940s. In some cases, they were required by banks and other lending institutions. In addition to racially restrictive covenants, there was explicit zoning that prevented people of color from integrating in any way into white neighborhoods. Even though racially explicit zoning was ruled unlawful by the Supreme Court in 1917, the practice continued in less obvious ways for decades. During the New Deal, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, or HOLC, was established. The HOLC used feedback from real estate professionals to develop risk categories and maps that were explicitly based on the unfounded association between race and risk. As you can see in this HOLC map of Baltimore, the government shaded areas in red and coded them as hazardous if there were any Black households in the area. This led to the term redlining. So what does this all mean? Well, given the centuries of discriminatory policies by government as well as private actors, the home ownership gap between people of color and white individuals is large. Overall, the home ownership rate for Asian Americans in 2023 was 63% compared to 73.8% for whites. Controlling for income and education in Asian households have a substantially lower home ownership rate than whites. Given that home ownership is the cornerstone of building wealth in the United States, it's not surprising that the home ownership gap between whites and communities of colors remains large. Turning now to the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act is our nation's primary fair housing law. On April 11th, 1968, President Lyndon Johnson signed into law Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, known as the Federal Fair Housing Act. The law was passed 7 days after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The law was passed to honor Dr. King's work to create open and fair housing in the United States. The twin goals of the Fair Housing Act are to prohibit discrimination in housing and replace existing patterns of residential segregation with truly integrated and balanced living patterns. One of the most comprehensive civil rights laws, it prohibits a wide range of discriminatory housing practices and provides strong remedies, including injunctive relief and damages. These are the practices that are covered under, these are the protected classes that are covered under the Fair Housing Act. Our case against SB 264 involves national origin, which means a country of one's birth or where his or her ancestors originated. There's another protected class here, familial status, that some of you might not be familiar with. That means the presence of at least one child under the age of 18. Most residential housing in the United States is covered under federal, state, or local fair housing laws. Our case against SB 268 involves restrictions on home ownership. So things like single-family homes, condominiums, or residential investment property are all covered. Rental properties like apartments are also covered under the Fair Housing Act. Listed on this slide are a few of the key discriminatory housing practices. In our case against SB 264, we have alleged discriminatory housing practices such as refusal to sell or otherwise make unavailable, which reaches housing practices that make it difficult for people in protected classes like national origin to keep or obtain housing. Discriminatory terms and conditions, which covers differences in treatment in obtaining housing or once housing is obtained, and then interference with the exercise of rights granted under the Fair Housing Act. There are a couple other key features of the Fair Housing Act that I wanted to mention. Our case involves claims of intentional discrimination and also disparate impact, which means that SB 264 has a discriminatory effect or disproportionate effect on people based on national origin. As John alluded to, the federal government has a substantial role in enforcing the Fair Housing Act. In fact, John was the lead person for HUD, which HUD is charged with one of the federal agencies that's charged with enforcing the Fair Housing Act, and anyone who has can file an administrative complaint with HUD alleging violations of fair housing laws. And then the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice can file their lawsuits on their own behalf, or after HUD has conducted an investigation and found that it's likely that discrimination has occurred, the Department of Justice can also file an action based on the HUD investigation. Turning now to our lawsuit, National Fair Housing Alliance versus Kelly. This is a lawsuit filed against Florida officials responsible for implementing SB 264. The lawsuit is focused on violations of the Fair Housing Act. It alleges that SB 264 discriminates on the basis of national origin because it restricts the ability of people from China and 6 other targeted countries to purchase homes in Florida. The lawsuit was filed by the National Fair Housing Alliance, AREAA, 2 Florida Fair Housing Organizations, and Asian American-owned Florida Real Estate Company. SB 264 prohibits anyone who is a member of the People's Republic of China, a member of any political party in China, or domiciled in China, and not a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident from purchasing property anywhere in Florida, and restricts purchases of real property within 10 miles of critical infrastructure facilities, military installations by foreign principals of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, and Syria. A category that includes all persons domiciled in those countries and all members of political parties in those countries except U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents. There are pretty severe penalties for violating SB 264. SB 264 makes it a felony for anyone subject to the China-specific provisions to purchase real property in violation of the law, and makes it a misdemeanor for a foreign principal of any of the 7 targeted countries to purchase real property in violation of the law. And real property acquired in violation of the law may be forfeited to the state. Our complaint alleged that the law was motivated by discriminatory intent. During Governor DeSantis' initial press release about the bill, he invoked insidious stereotypes accusing Chinese people of worming their way into American society. We also allege that the law has severe disproportionate effects on people from the 7 targeted countries. The complaint further alleges that SB 264 restricts foreign principals of the 7 targeted countries from purchasing property in most of the state of Florida, as you can see from the map right here. So our lawsuit was filed in the Southern District of Florida. It was assigned to a judge appointed by President Obama. It was filed in May 2024. The lawsuit's attorneys are National Civil Rights Firm Relman Colfax, Asian American Justice Center, and the National Fair Housing Alliance. And the status of the case is that shortly after we filed, the Florida officials moved to transfer venue to the Northern District of Florida, where the Shen versus Simpson case is located. That motion was denied, but the judge did grant the motion to stay the case pending the 11th Circuit decision in the Shen versus Simpson case, the earlier case filed. So at this point, we are just waiting for the 11th Circuit to make its decision in that case before our case will proceed. In conclusion, the Fair Housing Act is one of our nation's most significant civil rights laws and can be used to effectively challenge alien land laws that attempt to restrict ownership of residential real property through legal advocacy. We'll turn it back over to John.
Thanks very much, Scott, for the very insightful overview. I'm excited now to bring on Hope Atuel from AREAA to join Scott and me for a discussion on these subjects. We'll explore some of the questions you have submitted already during the registration process and take a closer look at these important issues. We've got a lot of people that our audience is growing by the minute, but I'm sure we have a lot of non-lawyers. And if you could help us, both of you, break down when we talk SB 264, that's the state law passed by the legislature in Florida. And there are other states doing similar things. But if you could just walk through it on a more personal level in Florida, what is it we're exactly talking about? We're talking about property, houses, buying condos everywhere in Florida.
Did you want me to start, John or Scott?
Either one of you. What we're really looking for is a little bit more of does it apply to foreign students? Does it apply to a refugee? Does it apply to a doctor who comes here, gets married, wants to buy a house? If you can add some personal flavor to what it is people are facing and why your organizations are in the lead opposing this. Hope?
Sure. Thank you, John, for asking that question. I don't have a law background, so Scott, help me out here. As I understand, the bill SB 264 in Florida prohibits real property rights, right? Homeownership. And that's why AREAA got involved in the lawsuit, is prohibits homeownership for certain individuals who do not have, or who have citizenship and are domiciled in countries, Scott, that are deemed adversarial to the United States. And for the purpose of this call, we in this webinar, we're looking specifically at China, right? And so right now, as it stands, if you are on a student visa, right, because you're not a U.S. citizen, you're not a legal permanent resident, and presumably, you know, your actual domicile is in China, even if you are here in a student visa, you would fall under that. And so if I am not mistaken, Scott, that would then prohibit someone who is in a student visa to purchase a home in Florida. And what is even much more concerning for AREAA, because we do have a big majority of our membership are real estate professionals, real estate agents and brokers. If, as Scott had said, if you participate in the transaction, then, you know, it could either be a felony or a misdemeanor. And real estate agents and brokers know this, right? That they have to abide by the Fair Housing Act. That is part of their training. That is part of their licensing. That is part of their education. And so one of the things that concerns us is that our members then, or real estate agents and brokers, are going to unfortunately violate the Fair Housing Act. And there are many things, right? There are many unintended consequences, such as, well, how do you know that someone is actually domiciled and has citizenship either here in the United States or do you make that assumption? You can't ask, right? That's going to be in violation of the Fair Housing Act. Or do you just say, I'm not going to work with you because your last name sounds like it's Chinese? I have a staff team who's very, who's not just biracial, but multiracial. And if you take a look at some of them, they don't look like they have Chinese descent, but their last name sounds like it's Chinese. So would you go by surname? So it's something, John, you had said, it's something personal for us at AREAA, because it is going to be discriminatory, whether we like it or not. And so, Scott, I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, thanks, Hope. That was a great explanation. So I think I want to just make the point that anytime that you legalize housing discrimination, it can have a lot of ripple effects. So I think Hope was pointing out that people are placed in the position of trying to determine whether or not people are covered by the law, and they may often just err on the side of assuming that someone is covered by the law because they have an Asian surname, because they look Asian. And so this is going to open, this law opens the door to discrimination against Asian Americans, like much more broadly than the targets of the law itself. It also means that people, this case has received wide publicity. The ACLU Shen versus Simpson case received a lot of publicity. It means that people in other states may have heard about this case, and people that are unsophisticated may assume that they can discriminate against Asian Americans, even if they're not in Florida and covered by SB 264. And then the last thing is that I think that, there's the potential for anytime any type of discrimination is legalized, as SB 264 does, it opens the door to other types of discrimination. I think we've seen in history that alien land laws then led to other restrictions on people being admitted to professions like the law profession. So I think that there's a huge potential for there to be discrimination both in housing and in other areas of life.
As you know, Scott, it can spread. Originally, it was focused on property near a military base. And then suddenly in some states said, well, let's make it some near a dam or near a reservoir. Then it's let's make it the whole state. So these things spread. Another way it spreads is both people who are risk averse. They say, as Hope notes, well, the person's last name is Leong, or maybe their first name is Mei Ling. And they're going to say, I heard about this law. I haven't read it. I can't find it, but I heard about it. So I'm just going to like avoid certain customers. And then there are others who are mean-spirited. And we've seen them all over the past few years, particularly through the rise in anti-Asian violence and attacks. There's just one more thing that they can use to say, hey, go back to where you came from, or hey, speak English, or oh, you're a foreigner. And that's the part where it's less of what's in the specific of the law, but more of it encourages and emboldens people to step up and do those kinds of things. So this is what AREAA and NFHA and others have taken on. And just one other point that your comment prompted me to think about is that we have a lot of people here on H-1B visas and on other visas where they're here for years. They're not yet citizens or permanent residents, and they can't buy a house under this law. Or someone who's a refugee, and I want to go turn to the first question that we have from our audience. Question is, are American citizens able to purchase real property in the People's Republic of China? Does anybody know the answer to that?
I don't, but I can actually get that information for that particular audience member, or I can share that with the staff over at the Committee of 100. but I don't know the exact answer to that. I can get that answer.
It's an interesting question. I think in some respects for this topic, it's a little bit irrelevant. A lot of the things we do in the United States, we don't say, oh, well, other countries do it, so we can do it. It's like if you're a parent and your child says, well, somebody else's mother lets us stay out till midnight, does that make it the standard? We have our, as a nation of immigrants and our own standards and principles as a country, we don't necessarily say, well, the country you fled from, those are the rules we're going to operate under. Or some other country, those are the rules we're going to operate under. We have, and as Scott has very fully explained under the Fair Housing Act, some basic principles about non-discrimination and about treating people equally. So another question we have is, what can AREAA leaders and members in Florida do to make a difference with the lawsuit? What are the next steps in the lawsuit? Scott, can you jump in on that?
Sure. Yeah. So the next steps in the lawsuit. So right now, as I mentioned, the case is stayed. So it's nothing will happen until there's a decision in the Shen v. Simpson case from the Court of Appeal. But once that decision is made, then our case will go forward. The initial stage of a lawsuit is trying to get information from the other side. So we'll start the process of getting information from the other side and moving the case forward. It's possible that we could move for a preliminary injunction, which means that we would ask the court to stop aspects of the law from going forward. We haven't made that determination yet. Shen v. Simpson case, there was a motion for a preliminary injunction, which was denied, and then it went up on appeal, and that's the decision that we're waiting for. So that'll be the next step. Once the court makes the decision in the 11th Circuit case, then we believe our case will be able to move forward, and we'll start, just starting the process of actually litigating the case and getting information from the other side. The other side will get information from us, and then at some point we will move to a trial about SB 264.
So for our real estate professionals in Florida, our audience members in Florida, people interested in buying a house, can we say SB 264 doesn't apply? Is there any part of 264 that is now law that they're going to have to deal with?
Very much so. Scott, if I can take that question, very much so. And, we have been, AREAA has been collaborating not just with the National Association of Realtors, but also with the Florida Association of Realtors and guidance, right? Because when the law was passed and made, when the bill was passed and made into law, there was very, very little guidance to real estate professionals. And it's very confusing, right? There is supposed to be a registration, Scott, I think. It's not exactly clear. There's supposed to be a form that's, and so education is very, very important. And I was just glancing at some of the questions, John, you had asked. What can AREAA leaders do? Well, AREAA leaders beyond Florida need to educate really all of our members that this is going on, right? That this is something that is a threat to our community because it doesn't stop in Florida. In 2022, we were alerted by our Texas members that SB 147 was in fact being considered in Texas. Thanks to our very aggressive and informed leaders and members in Texas, we have 4 chapters there, banded together with Congressman Al Green and Representative Jean Wu and many others, including APA Justice, AAJC. We were able to build a coalition and was very successful in defeating SB 147. Little did we know that there was something that was going on in Florida that was actually being pushed into already a bill that was going to be passed into law. And so it's important to actually be informed that this is going on. And I believe at the very beginning of this webinar, Cindy had mentioned that there are 28 states that are getting ready to pass something similar. Now, they might be narrowly scoped and looking at agricultural land, but it's very concerning. It's very concerning. I know Georgia passed something fairly similar, covers agricultural land and all of that stuff. So we need to be vigilant. We cannot be complacent. We need to educate not just our members, but our community as well, that this is happening. And we have, we every May we're in DC and advocating for priorities. I think this is something that we need to really amplify our messaging, that
Well,
we're
you're doing a
concerned.
great job of it today, Hope and Scott, and we've got a lot of people on the line here. A number of them are saying, so what do I do if it's coming up in my state, or how do I find out? Is there a central place at AREAA or NAFA to go to find out this information? Now we have the Committee of 100 on their website. They've got this interactive chart. But where does someone, either an AREAA member or someone, want more information from AREAA? How do they get it?
Oh my goodness. I wish that we had the bandwidth, that AREAA had the bandwidth to really take a look at what is going on state by state, but it takes a village, right? It takes working with NAFA, it takes working with Committee of 100, it takes working with AJC, APA Justice, even with the National Association of Realtors. We are working closely with their fair housing staff, both Brian Green and Alexis Mokler and many others have been, collaborating with us on really how to address this, because it's not just consumers, right? It's real estate agents and brokers, and how do they actually navigate through this without violating the federal fair housing law. But also, at the end of the day, how can we make sure that we protect the right to shelter, right? It's housing. We just want a home. It's great that our homeownership rate continues to improve. It's 63%. But is this actually are these laws going to impede our ability to own a home, right? And that's why, again, going back to the decision of the AREAA leadership to join in this a lawsuit against Florida, at the end of the day, that's our North Star. It's home ownership for our community. And yeah, Scott, I don't know if you guys aggregate all of this stuff, because there's a lot of things going on. And I know that, obviously, it's fair housing for you guys, and in some instances it's agricultural land, and I'm not sure if that is under your wheelhouse as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are tracking these bills to the extent that they apply to residential real property, because that's what the Fair Housing Act covers. And so NAFA has members, well, as John mentioned, that NAFA has members across the country. Some of those members are under threat of losing their funding, but as of now, we have members in most states, and we are tracking these bills as they come up, to the extent that they apply to residential property. And NAFA members in those states, as the bills come up, would be interested in hearing from folks who are either affected by these bills or want to do something about them, and can help people, members of the general public, like try to figure out what they can do in their particular state to help with this issue.
So would it be fair to say people can go to the Committee of 100 website to see the interactive map, that AREAA members and anybody can look up the AREAA chapter in their state and try to get information there, and and go to your local fair housing association, and in general, writing to the state legislators, writing to the governor to say, this is, state your view. I won't say what you should say, but state your views on the subject.
For sure. And, work with your local real estate association, your local realtor association. There's a lot. And again, that was key to defeating SB 147. The Texas Association of Realtors collaborated with AREAA chapters and many others. So I think that that's important, right? Because again, it takes a village. We can't do this alone. We need to have a much more powerful voice and be civically engaged. I know that we are a community and a culture who typically do not want to get involved from a civic engagement standpoint. Well, now is the time to do it because we need to have our voices heard. It's growing up, right? We're told don't rock the boat, keep your head down, just work. Well, that's what we've done, and centuries later, we are still trying to fight the right to belong here in this country, and it's gonna continue if we don't make our voices heard.
Well, our AREAA and NFHA definitely are, as well as you say, a broad coalition. Henry Tang asks, what's the position of mainstream non-Asian real estate associations regarding these laws? And I think you've answered that is by saying that they are also part of the coalition to defeat the law in Texas and are, I think, part of the litigation in the state of Florida. And because of the expertise of our audience, we have an answer, multiple answers on the question of being able to purchase real property in the People's Republic of China. A lot of experts, including Amy Kong, past president of AREAA, who says, yes, we can buy property in China. So we have that. I think Amy is as good authority on a lot of things as anyone. So we can take that off of the list of the growing list of questions and answers. Scott, you mentioned in the litigation that the Federal Department of Justice issued a statement of interest about the Fair Housing Act and in support of the challenges to the Florida law. We've had a new administration. Is there any indication of what the new administration either has done or plans to do?
Yeah, so in the Shen v. Simpson case, the Department of Justice under President Biden issued a statement of interest. It came on the side of the plaintiffs challenging the law. They essentially said that the law was facially discriminatory, that it violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, and that there was no real reason, no bona fide reason for the law. Normally, those types of statements of interest have a lot of influence on the court because it's the decision, or it's the view of the U.S. Department of Justice, which is one of the agencies that's charged with enforcing the Fair Housing Act. So traditionally, those statements of interest have carried a lot of sway in the courts and have weighed in favor of plaintiffs challenging alien lands laws like SB 264. We don't know for certain how the Department of Justice under this administration will act, but based on other things that they're doing, I think it's fair to say that at best we can hope that they stay out of the fight. I think it's certainly possible that they could weigh in favor of states that are adopting alien land laws. So I think that it's a very different landscape, unfortunately. And the Biden statement of interest had a real, I think, effect on the court in this case, and I think had an impact on how people think about these laws.
We have a question from one of our attendees, and you mentioned, Scott, that the current list of countries or people who are from certain countries, China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia. The question from the member of the audience is, what is to stop legislators from adding other countries and regions of origin to existing pieces of legislation. It seems we are on the cusp of banning Mexicans and Canadians too. So the question is there a basis for these countries, and what does prevent other countries from being added to the list?
Yeah, John, I don't know that there is anything to prevent other countries from being added to the list. And I think given, today's climate on immigration and national security and anti-China and anti-other countries like Mexico and Canada rhetoric, I think that it's very possible that other countries could be added to the list of countries that are where people are impacted by these alien land laws.
And I think we need to remember the distinction between we can have for foreign policy reasons, we can have countries that we're mad at, we can retaliate against them, we can do all sorts of things to those countries. But these laws don't apply just to those countries or companies that are in those countries who buy things here, buy property, land, etc. This is about people who live here, people who've been here for a long time. They're not yet permanent residents, they're not yet citizens, but in a sense, we are blaming people who are here for whatever's going on in another country, where maybe even if they were there, maybe they wouldn't have any say in what that country is doing, let alone being here. I'm looking for other questions from the audience. I think we've addressed a lot of them. How do we see things going forward? Is there now legislation in Washington, D.C. That would I hate to use the word Trump the states. What's happening in Washington on this?
So at the last Congress, we have a new Congress. There was a bill that was introduced by, I believe, one of the co-author was Congressman Al Green from Houston, from Texas, and it is a bill that preempts actually these alien land laws. Unfortunately, that bill, it has not made any type of like movement, I think, past the committee. And so not really sure if that bill will be introduced, and if it will be reintroduced, will there be a chance that it could pass through? That is a question that we will have to see. AREAA is considering, one of our top 3 priorities is obviously trying to combat all of these alien land laws, among many other things. So that is currently, I think, where we are right now. There are 50 states. I'm not sure, again, how we combat this state by state, because it is still federal law. It's sort of like cannabis, right? Marijuana, it's still federally, it's still a crime to, or I guess not a crime, but some of the states have made it legal, either for medicinal or recreational purpose. But then if if you are in possession in a federal facility like the airport, then you could still be arrested. So I think that's where we are right now. But yeah, states are unfortunately passing these laws that conflict with the federal fair housing, John.
And we had a question about what happens to pre-existing owners? Are they grandfathered in? Are they gonna have to sell their property?
From what I understand, Scott, there is, again, a registry for these property owners who are kind of like classified in this. And again, not really sure what the direction is, if there is even kind of like a timeline for registering your property. Are they supposed to sell the property? Not really sure what actually is the guidance for this at this certain juncture.
Yeah, there is a certain date before which people are grandfathered in, but after that date, then people will have to comply with the law. And if for some reason there are inherit property, for example, then they are given a time period within which they have to sell it after the effective date of the law. So there are people who already held property as of when the law went into effect are grandfathered in. People who get property through other means other than buying property at some point need to sell it, and as Hope mentioned, need to register as well.
We're getting close to the end of our discussion. A few more questions and a few more comments. I know APA Justice has followed this very closely, and I read something from APA Justice about a Texas law or bill, not a law, but a bill that says that property would go into receivership and perhaps ultimately into a for sale, but that the Texas bill is triggered by a determination by the state if the person comes from a country where they are is susceptible to, if the sale of the property would impair public safety, public health, and there's some legitimate questions as to what that actually means. And as you both have noted earlier, once you establish that we can have restrictions as have been described, there's really no telling where those go. So people are trying to figure out in Texas, well, if I have the flu, does that mean is selling the property to me going to affect anybody's public health, or can somebody just say that? You can come up with a lot of different legal interpretations that may not fly in court, but that can be enough to dissuade a seller, dissuade a buyer, and that's really the reality of what's going on here.
John, and then
yes.
the question about those potential concerns, right? Health risk or what have you. Who's actually going to arbitrate all of that stuff, right? Is there going to be now an agency that is it the Real Estate Commission? And yeah, so the ambiguity of all of these stuff is a concern, certainly.
Yeah, and how it plays out everyday America is a tremendous concern, which is why these bills have really increased the level of opposition. I see the Honorable Cindy Wu is one of our participants, and she is indicating that the members of the National Association of Realtors Fair Housing Committee have been collaborating, and there's going to be an AAA and NFHA Advocacy Day in California on April the 28th in Sacramento. So they're hoping to be able to really increase the participation in that, and to be able to spread the word. Kenneth Lee comments that Congressman Al Green and State Representative Jean Wu have really done tremendous amount to support the community's efforts against these bills. We have someone, Fulton Ho, who a program associate at C100, emailed, "We firmly oppose any efforts by any foreign government to influence or undermine American society and democracy. Our dual mission is to promote the full participation of Chinese Americans in American life and advance a constructive Sino-American dialogue." So I think the question sometimes becomes whether there's a blur between the interests and needs and rights of Chinese Americans as opposed to the property interests of foreign corporations from any country to buy property in the United States. So again, on this one, we're talking about people, not corporations, and I think that's something that is an important point to distinguish as all of these debates go forward. Hope, Scott, do you have any final words before I turn this over to Jeremy Wu?
I can actually say a few words. I know we're getting close to our ending time. You know, we continue this fight, right? We continue the mission of promoting homeownership for our community, for the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community, but really for all Americans. And it's great that we are conducting webinars like this, informational and educational sessions. And we hope that we can continue to collaborate with NAFA and with APA Justice and Committee of 100 to, again, amplify our voice. We can't do this singularly, right, siloed, but I think collectively we can make a difference. So we continue to fight. Thank you.
Yeah, I think echo the same sentiments as Hope. Just appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak on this issue and to collaborate with the Committee of 100, APA Justice, AREAA. This is a really important issue and has ramifications well beyond just the people that this bill is targeted at, and could lead to further housing discrimination and discrimination in other areas. And just really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this and bring awareness on this issue.
Well, I thank you both and your organizations, and I know that our many participants do as well. After I left HUD, I went into legal education as dean of a law school and gotten a little bit away from it. But you both and the issues inspire me to get back involved in support of fair housing. This is a great discussion. I want to thank both of you. And now I want to turn this over to Jeremy Wu from APA Justice to wrap up today's session and share a few closing remarks.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Hope and Scott. This is really an insightful and informative webinar. Your expertise has shed light on pressing issues that demands our attention. I do want to start with my background, that we belong, and I think that's one central message that I would like to send. Today's discussion highlights the urgent challenges posed by the resurgence of alien land laws, a stark reminder that history is repeating itself. These laws, once used to discriminate against Asian immigrants in the early 20th century, are now resurfacing under the guise of national security concerns. Yet their underlying impact remains unchanged. They foster exclusion, xenophobia, and the erosion of fundamental rights for Asian Americans, particularly those of Chinese descent. The consequences go well beyond just one community. These laws threaten broader property rights, hinder business investments, and strain international relations. Today's webinar reminds us that fair housing rights are fundamental to equality and opportunity. Policies that discriminate based on race, national origin, or citizenship status undermine those principles and must be challenged. Discrimination packaged as policy does not stop at its original target. The alien land laws of the past were eventually overturned through legal battles, collective action, and persistent advocacy. It's not easy. That same determination is needed today. Let us continue this discussion and join us in Los Angeles on April 25th and 26th at the Committee of 100's annual conference and gala, where experts will explore legal battles, policy implications, and advocacy strategies to combat the revival of alien land laws. Conference details are available in the chat. We appreciate your participation and engagement today. There were a lot of questions, a lot of discussions. Some of them may not be answerable. Some of them were answered. So please take a moment to complete our survey at the conclusion of today's webinar. And the recording for today's webinar will be made available on the Committee of 100's website and YouTube page. So with that, I want to thank all of you, the speakers, the audience, and have a great evening. Thank you. Good night.